Hello everybody, this is Graeme Anderson, and today I'm going to be looking at Tabannusi. Now this is the fourth, I think, of the T games from Boards and Dice. If you have never heard of the T series before, it's a group of games revolving around ancient cities and their civilizations. From the Mesoamerican, to the Incans, to the Egyptians, and back to the Sumerians with Tabannusi. Now, each game is independent of the others, but they all are linked by maybe a thematic idea. So, when I saw this one, I was really excited to get it to the table. Now, I have to admit that although my enjoyment of each game has kind of diminished as the new ones have come out, there are none of these that I don't like. I would have no problem recommending any of these games to any players that asked me. So, in this game, in Tabannusi, you're building up the ancient city of Ur. I think I have that name pronounced correctly. And it has some very interesting mechanisms around movement and the such. There's also a fair bit of player interaction. Not in the sense of a take that, but more being able to play off other players and needing to be watching what they're doing. Being able to piggyback on other players' actions or take opportunities away from them are decision points that I find really intriguing. But I can also see how it might be a little frustrating, so hopefully there's a good balance in this game. So, will this game reach the heights of some of the previous ones, or will it be in the shadow of greatness? Let's get at the table, see how it's played, and it is a fairly lengthy overview, so if there are chapter things in the comments, I would skip to those if you don't want to hear the rules overview, but then we'll come back with my final thoughts on Tabannusi. So here's Tabannusi set up for 3 players. I'm only showing one player's game mat because of the size of the play area. I'm also not going to be going through all the rules as there are a fair number, so I'll just try to hit the main points of the gameplay. Now before getting into the rules, let's quickly talk about the different elements in the game to give you a better understanding of the forthcoming rules. Your player area is where we're going to be storing all of your acquired pieces, like the crate tiles, gold, water tiles, etc. At the start of the game, you'll have all but one of your houses on your player board, because during setup you'll have placed one building on the main board. You start the game with 5 claim markers. All the other markers are placed in the general supply. They are used to claim areas on the board, such as project tiles, garden tiles, or ship tiles. Your claim markers are limited in supply, and you cannot place a claim marker if it's not in your personal supply. Some actions allow you to get extra markers, and you'll take them from the general supply and add them to your personal supply. And of course, there are actions which you're going to take, which are going to lose some of your claim markers back to the general supply. On your player board, you have 13 houses, and you'll be using them to create buildings and to claim them as yours. Buildings are groups of 1 to 3 plastic building pieces of the same color. The ownership of the building will be marked by a single house on that group of buildings. In this example here, the purple player owns the building of size 3, and 3 is the largest size of building that can be made. Whenever you build a building, you must take the leftmost house from your player board that matches the color of the buildings. The main board is split into 5 districts, numbered 1 through 5. Districts 1, 2, and 3 are common districts where you're going to be building the buildings. District 4 is the port, where players will gain access to ships and gain access to crates or other one-time abilities. District 5 is the ziggurat district, where players will gain access to scoring opportunities. Now each district has 3 or 4 actions, along with a barge that stores all of its colored dice. Now during the game you're going to be having 2 workers. The architect, which will be moved to the district where you begin taking your next turn's actions, and the assistant, which will be located in the district that you'll be performing your current turn's actions. How they actually move I'll talk about in the actual rules overview. The dice in the game are used in 2 different ways. When a die is first taken, the number of pips on the die will show you which district you will move your architect to. But after that, the number of pips does not matter. When you take a die, it's going to count as a single resource of that color, regardless of how many pips are showing. When you spend a resource, it goes back to the side of the board. It does not go back to the barge of the matching color. Crate tiles are permanent resources of a matching color. When you use a crate for its resource, you must flip it over. It can only be flipped back to be used again by giving up a resource of any color. One of the main ways of getting points is through the mastery track. As the game progresses, you'll be moving your markers up these tracks, and you'll see bonuses on the right side of the tracks. You only receive these when your lowest mastery marker reaches that spot. The left side of the board will show you how many points you're going to receive for those colored buildings when you're scoring districts 1, 2, and 3, and I'll talk a bit more about scoring those districts later on. And lastly, the gaining of resources. When an action asks you to collect a resource of a certain color, you're going to be taking the highest value die from that matching barge. When an action allows you to take a resource of any color, you'll take a die from the supply. That is a die that has been previously spent by any player. You cannot take a resource if the die does not exist in its respective areas. So those are some fundamental ideas of the games, and will make the following rules a bit easier to understand. Again, I'm not going to go into all the rules, but just give you an idea of what you can do on your turn. Now on your turn, you're going to be taking a die and moving your architect, performing up to 2 actions in the district where your assistant is, and finally check for scoring, move your assistant to where your architect is. Now the first thing you're going to do is going to taking a die from a barge where your architect and assistant currently are. Now the first turn in the game you get to place your architect and assistant in any district, but once you take a die, you're going to move your architect to the district that matches the value of the die. Now you'll notice that there is no district 6. If you take a 6 value die, you can move your architect to any district that you could not normally get to with the dice on the barge. So if there's a 1 die, a 2 die, and a 6 die, and you take the 6, you can move to district 3, 4, or 5. You cannot move to 1 or 2 because there are existing dice for those districts. Once you've taken the die and moved your architect, place the die next to your board. This now counts as a single resource of that color. Next, you can perform up to 2 actions where your assistant is. I'm going to go quickly through these. Place a project tile in a common district. You're going to select a tile from the supply. If there are 3 of the same color already in the district, you cannot place a 4th project tile. If there are already project tiles that match the color of your chosen tile, you must place yours next to the existing ones. You cannot place a project tile next to a building of the same color. You will then place one of your claim markers on the project tile, and if it covers a bonus, you're going to be receiving that bonus. To construct a building in a common district, and this is probably the most complex action, you're going to choose a single color of project tile within the district that you're taking your actions. You'll pay 2 resources that match the district that you're building in, plus 1 resource of the project tile color for each of your claim markers on the selected project tiles. You're going to set aside all the claim markers from that project tiles, replace the project tiles with the matching buildings of the same color, place one of your houses from your player board that matches the building color on top of it. If you have no more on your player board, you can remove them from the bottom row of your player board. You'll return your claim markers to the general supply that you just removed, and the other players will get the claim markers back into their personal supply. The other players will also receive a reward. If a player has a claim marker on an adjacent garden, they'll move up one of their markers on a mastery track of their choice. For players that had their claim markers returned to them during this construct a building action, they'll move up one of their markers on the mastery track that matches the new building's color. And finally, after building the building, you can spend 1 gold to place one of your claim markers on a ship in the port. The size of the building built will determine the number of ship you can place the marker on. So, if you build a building of size 2, you can place a claim marker on a number 2 ship. The gardening action, you can do 2 things. You can acquire any number of garden or water tiles. The garden tiles cost 1 green resource and water takes 1 blue resource. You can then place any number of water tiles adjacent to existing water tiles on the board in the district that you're taking your actions. You can then place up to 3 garden tiles in the district you're in on top of existing water tiles. For each garden that you place, you must place a claim marker on them. In the port district, you can take an action to place a house in this district. Spend 2 resources and place a house from the bottom row of your player board into one of the port districts to either get a one-time reward or a crate to add to your player board. Also in the port district, you can spend up to 2 gold to place a claim marker on any ship that does not already have one of your claim markers on it. Most ships will give you an ongoing special ability when you place your claim marker on them. If you now have 3 markers in a row or column, take the matching Harbor Master tile if it's still available. The final fixed action is in the ziggurat district. You pay 2 local resources and place a house of the matching color in one of the districts. If you cover up a bonus, you get it immediately. You then place a claim marker in the leftmost spot that does not already have one of your claim markers. So those are the fixed actions that are printed on the board. The other actions are randomized to different districts at the beginning of the game. They are: get 2 victory points and get 2 claim markers from the supply, get a gold and a claim marker, get a water, garden, and claim marker, move your architect to any space and gain 1 resource from the supply, refill up to 2 of your crates, that is, if they've been used, flip them back over and also take a claim marker, and finally, give up 2 points to move up 1 space on 1 mastery track. As for free actions on your turn, you can also refill a crate by discarding another resource, and you can score any of the decree cards which are randomized at the start of the game. To do that, you must demonstrate that you have fulfilled it, take the card from the board, and gain its bonuses immediately. The final thing you do on your turn is check for scoring. If there's no more dice left in a barge, then that district will score. And finally, you're going to be moving your assistant to where your architect is, and your turn is over. Now, for scoring a district, you'll receive 1 gold bar from the timer track. All players lose the district's local resources, which is the color of the barge that's next to the district. But you're going to be going up on the matching mastery track if you give up 1 or more yellow, white, or brown dice. If you give up 1 or more blue dice, you get a water tile, and you get a garden tile for green dice. Then you score the district. Now if it's a common district, that's district 1, 2, or 3, each player will see how many buildings they have in that district and score the number of spaces their buildings cover multiplied by their position on the matching mastery track. All gardens next to a building will also increase the size of that building by 1 irrespective of who owns the garden. If a port is scored, then each player will score 1 point for each of their claim markers in a row or column that they currently have a house. If the ziggurat scores, each player scores the rightmost claim marker on 1 or more tiles with their claim markers. Now each of these tiles will score differently and they're going to be randomized for each game. After scoring, all of the local dice are re-rolled and placed back on the bar to the district that just scored. The game end is triggered when the last gold is removed from the time track. You finish the current round and play one more round, then score each district again, and each player reveals and scores their urban cards, which you're going to be receiving at the beginning of the game, which score bonuses for building in certain districts. Then, the player with the most points is the winner. Let's get back to see what I thought about Tabannusi. So, theme and components. I'm a sucker for these themes, the idea of building up an ancient city or civilization, and although I, on the base level, enjoyed the theme, this is not what I would call a thematic game. Yes, you are building buildings and irrigation and gardens, but how are you doing it? Doesn't make much thematic sense. So even if you're not interested in the theme, you can probably happily ignore it and it should not affect your gameplay. Now on for the components. They were a bit of hit and miss for me. In general, I would say I'm fine with the components, but I did have some usability issues. The main game board is just too big for what the gameplay is. And I'm not a big fan of these little plastic houses. I really dislike the little tabs on them. I don't know if you can see there's little tabs on them. I understand why they're there, so they can kind of slide into the other ones and kind of interlock, but I found them more of a nuisance than a help. I also had an issue with the iconography on the cards, and I had to say it, also with these rules. But I'll talk more about the rules during the gameplay discussion. So for the components, from a high level, they were nice components, but I felt that there were some usability issues with them. Nothing that's game breaking, but I just found them a little annoying while playing the game. So on to the gameplay. I'm going to tell you right up front, the first time I played this game, I didn't like it. I thought it was just too cumbersome and too fiddly, and I didn't understand how things were working. On my second play, I felt pretty much the same. After my third play though, I sat there looking at the results and it maybe clicked for me. I was thinking what I should have done better. I can actually look back at it and find out where I made my mistakes. Then I started thinking of how I wanted to approach the next game. Subsequent plays I enjoyed a lot more. So what was it that I disliked about in those first plays? Now the first issue I had was these rules. I found them a little cumbersome and overwrought. For example, when you take the construct action, you pick a single group of project tiles. Then you have to pay 2 resources of the section that you're in, plus 1 resource for each of the project tile that you own in that block of the color of the project. Replace the project tiles with these little buildings and place a house from your player board that matches the building color, or take a building from the bottom row of your player board. If you clear something on your player board, you get a bonus action. Adjacent gardens can move up on any mastery track, and other players' markers that were removed so you could build these, they will go up on the mastery track that matches these constructed buildings. Then after all that, you still have the option to pay a gold piece to claim put a claim marker on a ship of the same size as the building you just constructed. Now, does all that make sense? Not really. It doesn't make much thematic sense, which makes it harder to internalize. Now, once you do internalize it though, that's when things start to get interesting. For example, you can construct on any project block, and it will not cost you any extra resources if you don't have one of those project tiles, just the 2 base ones. But you are giving players on the movement mastery track, which is a multiplier for that building color. Once I realized that, the game became much more interesting. Now another issue I had at the beginning of the game was the actual movement piece. You have to be looking a few moves ahead to make sure you can do what you want to do. For example, if you're in an area or a district and you want to do a project, unless you are lucky, you're going to have to move to another area on your next turn, and you have to kind of plan out how you're going to get back to that original project tile to either expand it or construct a building on it. And of course, you need the right number of resources, which was tricky to get my head around in the first play or so. Combined with the fact that dice are a random element and other players taking dice can affect where you can and want to move. I also felt that the game kind of ramped up rather quickly and can catch you off guard. You need to be watching all the dice pools to find out which one was going to trigger their scoring. And are 2 going to trigger fairly close together? If a common district area scores, do you have anything in that area to score? Do you need to try and rush back to get to that area? But that goes back to my previous point, is can you get back with what you need to affect any scoring in that area, or you just ignore it and kind of move on to the next area. I think all of my initial issues with the game were rules overhead, understanding how everything intertwines with each other to do some proper planning, and the fact that your plans can go awry because of what other players were doing. Constructing what you were planning to construct, or adding to a project where you think of that project as yours, even though it's not in a common area. But in my later plays, I realized that what I initially thought of was issues or negatives are actually what I ended up enjoying about the game. The basic mechanisms of projects and constructions were okay. The ships were a neat way to get ongoing abilities, but nothing overly special. The ziggurat area was end of game scoring, so you can try and tailor your gameplay. Well, I shouldn't say just end of game scoring, just for scoring opportunities. You can try and tailor your gameplay to that. Nothing we haven't seen before. So what sets this game apart are those actually extra rules. And I think there's a very fine line of elevating standard mechanisms with interesting rules and just making the game that feels a little too overwrought. I don't think this game got it right for all players. I feel for me it was just on the good side of that line, but many of the people I played with felt it was on the overwrought side of the game. So would I recommend this game? This is tough. It falls right on the border for me. But for me, on the recommend side. This game is not going to be for everyone. I ended up really liking many of the decision points and almost all the main actions on the board. The project action. Do I add to an existing project hoping to build it later? Or will one of my opponents construct it and I'll be able to move up on the mastery track? But if that's my plan, it does tie up one of my markers until it's constructed. And even the construction piece. Do you build where you have projects, or do you build someone else's projects? It's cheaper to do that, but especially where you don't have a claim marker, but it moves the other players up on the mastery track, and you will get a benefit of it. Hopefully, yes, because all areas are going to score at the end of the game, but will you be able to advance your mastery marker somehow during the game? Even the dice selection piece. If you're planning on taking a multi-step action in the one district, will you be able to get back? Is claiming a ziggurat spot more important than maybe doing construction of a building? I ended up really enjoying these decisions. I also like that you had to be watching several things at once. The dice pools, the other players' actions, the scoring cards. How close are people to that? Do I need to spend my precious actions for that? Trying to figure out what other players were trying to do is something I've always enjoyed in games. And how can I piggyback on their actions is always enjoyable to me. On the negative side of this game though, as much as I enjoyed the gameplay, I'm still bothered by the rules overhead. Nothing ever felt smooth, even after my many games over several weeks. I never felt I was anywhere close to being able to keep these rules in the box, not have to refer to them during the game. This game can also be very tight. This isn't a, hey, let's see where the game goes and I might pick up a strategy in a while. You almost always need a plan from the start. Are you going to go to ziggurat scoring? If so, what is it you need to be doing on the rest of the board? Going after those house scoring cards, there's going to be a race to get them first. Going heavy on construction, that's fine, but it does you no good if you can't go up on the mastery tracks. If your strategy gets messed up, it's hard to get back into the game. Now, it's not impossible, but it can feel like a real setback. And it's usually not something that you did. It could be another player taking your planned dice, or the district scoring sooner than you expected, or just the random die roll after scoring. You don't always have control over what you want to do and how you want to do it. So as you can see, I'm torn in this game, but I'm still looking forward to getting this one to the table again, as I did enjoy my later plays. So I'm going to give this game a 7 out of 10 in the Dice Tower seal of approval. If the rules were a bit more streamlined, this would definitely get a higher rating, as it would be easier to get to the table and engage more people with. And because of that difficulty of getting to the table, I do feel that I would probably pick another game that gave me the same depth of gameplay, but in a more manageable experience. Maybe even another game in the T series will still be looking at this one going, I really like that. I want to get back to the table. I just can't figure out how to get it back to the table with my play group. And that's it for the moment. Until next time, thanks for watching.